Hi everyone, welcome to the Bonney Weekly, or maybe not so weekly podcast. Today I thought I'd have a quick talk about one of my favourite subjects amongst the world of crime, and it's con men. And I've always had a bit of an affinity to someone who is prepared to go all the way, to really go kind of 10 out of 10 and to try and pull off a big scam or a big con. My favourite con man is a chap called Victor Lustig. He was born in 1890. He was a highly skilled con artist from Austria, who undertook a career in crime that involved some of the most audacious crimes and cons, such as, which is how I got to know about him, the Eiffel Tower scam. So basically, he sold the Eiffel Tower twice. Now, this sounds like something that surely couldn't be done. But back in the day, the Eiffel Tower was a bit like the Millennium Dome, as in it was supposed to be a temporary structure. It wasn't supposed to be there forever. And back in the 1925 kind of era, it was starting to look a little bit rusty. It started to kind of go into a bit of disrepair. So Lustig managed to con some Texans into believing that he owned or had the ability to sell the Eiffel Tower, and they was going to sell it to them for scrap. So let's have a quick look at the Wikipedia page here. So in 1925, Victor travelled back to France. While staying in Paris, he chanced upon a newspaper article discussing the problems faced with maintaining the Eiffel Tower, which gave him the inspiration for a new con. At the time, the monument had begun to fall into disrepair, and the city was finding it increasingly expensive to maintain and repaint it. Part of the article made a passing comment that the overall public opinion on the monument would move towards calls for its removal, which was the key to convincing Lustig that using it as part of his next con would be lucrative. After researching what he needed to help him utilise the information from the article, Lustig set to work preparing the scam, which included hiring a forger to produce fake government stationery for him. So after that, he basically got a team of scrap metal dealers in an expensive hotel, where he then convinced some rich financiers from America that he was able to sell the Eiffel Tower to them. And then obviously once they realised that they don't own it, he then left and hid away, and then he managed to again do the same con to someone else. He managed to sell it for around 70,000 French francs, which back then would have been an incredible sum of money. Not only that, he also created what, and I'm probably butchering the way it's called. It's the Romanian, but not Romania like the country, rum like the drink, Romanian box. Now, basically, this is a box, a small sort of shoebox size box, that had a turn handle on one side of it and some cranks and mechanisms inside. And he would put dollar bills into the machine, turn the crank, and then he basically got people to believe that this machine analysed the dollar bill, and in 6 hours' time, it would produce you another one. So people would come back 6 hours later, and he'd turn the crank handle, and the money they put in would come out, along with another bill. And he would even tell them, look, go to the bank and get it checked out. They'll confirm that it's it's as good as any other dollar bill. And all he was doing was he was just putting real money into the box. He'd put a number of bills in there before the con, and then turn the handle, and they would just come out of it. When people came interested in the box, he would then act like he wasn't interested in selling it, and he would only sell it once they offered him thousands and thousands of dollars for the machine. And then he'd put enough $100 bills in there so the machine would last for a day or two. Because obviously you've got to wait 6 hours for it to do its thing. So he'd put a few $100 bills in there so that whoever bought the machine would use it for a day or so, and then he'd realise after that they'd been conned. And I was just reading it, and he even sold one to a police officer. One of Lustig's most infamous uses of the device was upon a Texas sheriff, whom he convinced to buy it for thousands of dollars. Upon realising he had been tricked, the sheriff pursued Lustig to Chicago. Upon meeting him again, the sheriff was conned into believing him that he was not operating the device correctly, and he was handed a large sum of cash as compensation, completely unaware that the money was counterfeit, and this counterfeiting would eventually lead to his arrest by the American law enforcement officers. So, so again, once even the sheriff caught him, he was able to con his way out of getting away with it. So he even, just reading here, that when the Great Depression hit, Lustig concocted a risky scam aimed at Al Capone, knowing that he faced certain death if his mark realised he was being conned. I did not know this. For Lustig, the scam was not a straight-out con, but one designed to get his target to part with a relatively small amount of cash. Lustig asked Capone to invest $50,000 in a crooked scheme, and then he kept the money given to him in a safe deposit box for 2 months before returning it, claiming the deal had fallen through. Capone got the impression that he was dealing with an honest man. At this point, Lustig told Capone that the failure of the deal meant he had lost all means of supporting himself. He then convinced Al Capone to give him $5,000 to tide him over, as Lustig had originally planned. In 1930, he went... so that was the whole con, just to get $5,000 out of Al Capone. Wow. But yeah, no, I think the way he got caught in the end was because he ended up in a... he ended up in France, and he got a loan from the French government to do up a farm. But obviously he just took the money and did nothing with the farm. And the French government was sick of him, so they went to the FBI, and the FBI came to the farm. The two agents found Lustig, and they not only did they not arrest him, but I think, as the story went, they ended up giving him money, and he ended up getting away again. He was caught later on, but can you imagine there being those two FBI officers going back to their office and having to explain not only not arresting him, but giving him money to be getting on his way with as well. So yeah, my favourite ever con man, Victor Lustig. Now that leads me on to talking about a modern day con man, or con woman in this instance. Now her trial's going on at the moment. It's a lady called Elizabeth Holmes. Now, some of you may have heard about this, some of you may not, but it's one of the most interesting and possibly straight up cons, possibly right idea, wrong execution of the plan, or was it just that her ego got the better of her? But so I'll just give you a bit of background to this. Now, I remember first of all hearing about this lady because she was one of the first, I think she's one of the first self-made billionaires in America. At one point she was estimated, her company was worth $9 billion. She, at the age of 19, dropped out of Stanford University, which is obviously one of the big ones up there with Harvard and things in America. And she claims that she had invented a blood testing machine that, from a pinprick of blood, could run hundreds of tests. Not needing the need then for big needles and big vials of blood. I know anybody who's had blood tests taken, sometimes they take 2 or 3 vials of this blood with a big needle in your arm. It can be quite daunting, especially for people who are sick and have to give blood all the time. This is a terrible process. So Elizabeth Holmes, a university dropout, claimed that she had invented a machine that you put your hand into. It takes a prick of blood, and then it runs hundreds of tests on that drop of blood. Now, this obviously shook the medical world. She was in Silicon Valley, obviously, where all the big players are and the big ideas, and Microsoft's, Google's, Twitter's, all the big names in the world. They're all there. There's plenty of money flying about. And then she goes on an investing tour, basically, getting some of the world's biggest names to invest in the company. Now, because she's smart, she's also gone to some of the big names in the government to get help with this. She's gone to people like Henry Kissinger. She's gone to other ex-members of the government to be on her board. She's pulled out some big names. I'll just find some 1 second. Okay, so the company attracted big name board members. The former US Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, the US Secretary of State, George Shultz, and the former US Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. Okay, so these are big names, obviously, adding a lot of weight to the company. If you went to any investors meeting and you told investors who didn't really know anything about taking blood or how biomedicine works, then you just look at the board and you'd go, wow, these are serious guys. They must know what they're talking about. So if they're in, then I'm in. And she then went about and she managed to secure hundreds of millions of dollars for this blood taking device. She managed to get investments, from the Walmart family. They were in. She managed to get investments from the guy who owns all the media. What's his called? Fox News. Rupert Murdoch. I think he invested around 150 million. And there was all sorts of other investors, right down to your kind of small-time investors, your little mom-and-pop investors who are, investing 150 grand, 50 grand, things like this. So, yeah, she managed to secure hundreds of millions of dollars across the board. And everyone who met her thought she was brilliant. That's the way they kind of describe her. Whenever you hear anybody talk about first meeting Elizabeth Holmes, they all describe her as brilliant. They say that she's, the next Steve Jobs or the next Bill Gates. They all kind of put her in that room of people of kind of like geniuses and and people way ahead of their time. So yeah, she like I say, she came with this steamroller of a board of directors. She wowed investors, and people just had this air of brilliance that they thought that she was there, and people just thought she was going to change the world, and they all wanted to be on board. If she was selling a lie, they were willing to buy it, and they were looking to be part of that whole story. So then what happened over the next few years is just insane. So obviously this box didn't work. So when you put your hand into it, it took a prick of blood, yes, but it failed to run the tests. And it could only run maybe 10 tests on a drop of blood. And they're all fairly basic tests. There's not... She was pitching this so that she could be, everybody should be able to, know if they've got illnesses. They should be able to know if they've got cancers. This should be able to revolutionize everything, she was saying. And it wasn't working at the time that she was pitching it and saying that it was working. And when the holes started to show, she would then just sack people and get rid of them. And she made everyone sign these agreements that they couldn't ever talk about it. And the minute they left, she would always hit them with a lawyer's letter, the next day. And she'd have people sat outside their houses and things like this just to intimidate them not to speak to anybody. But the machines just didn't work. So what she then went about doing is she basically found more investors by lying and saying that it was being used with the military. And that's why there was so much secrecy about it, because these were trade secrets. It was being used by the military, and that's why nobody could ever look in the box to kind of see for themselves. Because obviously all these tests that she was saying that she could do in 4 hours, it was taking, you'd have to normally send them off to a lab, and it would take all day to get the results back at a huge cost. And she was saying that she could do it for relatively little, with just a pinprick of blood. So, like I say, people started asking questions. She then went to say that they're working with the military, and then she got another round of investing. So she got more money coming in. And then she started to become obsessed with, Steve Jobs and the whole Apple ethos, as in like design over everything. So she started poaching all the staff from Apple. head designers, things like this. A lot of Apple staff came over from Apple to come and work at her company to help her with the design and the just the makeup. But again, they would want to see, these were serious guys, they're not daft, so they would want to see the box working, which they couldn't. They'd want to see inside the box, which they couldn't. And these guys would end up leaving the company and then being slapped with big orders, having lawyers chasing them. People sat outside their house again, so they all kind of stayed quiet. But there was all these kind of rumblings that this was just all smoke and mirrors. And obviously people talk, there must have been gossip. Within Silicon Valley, then there was all this kind of rumor mill that it just didn't work, and it was just not working at all. But that was the point when Elizabeth Holmes suddenly did this deal with Walgreens, which is a big supermarket chain in America. It's like doing a deal with Tesco's in the UK. That she was going to get one of these devices in every Walgreens in the country, which would then mean that people were only ever 5 miles away from getting this revolutionary blood test that would, tell them about any cancers or any, just give them a whole diagnostics of their health from one pinprick of blood. Walgreens sent an expert over to have a look in the box. She wouldn't let them look. She wouldn't let him look. But again, the expert told them, Walgreens don't have anything to do with this. We can't see any results, blah, blah, blah. She managed to con her way through it. She managed to, get her way for the board of the company to still run ahead with the rollout, even though that nobody had seen the machine work and they'd never even seen inside the box. So again, this is all the hallmarks of a good con woman. She just managed to keep it rolling for longer. It did actually roll out. It didn't go out to all of their sort of thousands of stores, but it did go out to about 18 of them, or I think it may have gone up to about 80 of them. But again, the machines didn't work. They didn't do the tests that they said they could. So when people would go to these health centres that were set up inside the supermarket, they would basically just have to take a needle of blood, either being told that the machine wasn't working that day, or for their particular blood test, they would need a normal vial of blood, which is not what these people were being sold. And Elizabeth Holmes at this time had actually gone to a huge marketing company, one of the elite marketing companies in America, and had been running adverts across America selling the fact that you would only need one pinprick of blood, and anybody who doesn't like needles should come and use her machines. Even doctors, their own kind of GP in America, even their own doctor was recommending that they would go down to a supermarket and get their blood done there rather than a usual clinic to go and get their blood done. Now, the way they got round their blood test machines not working is they had to buy in third-party blood test machines. So these were blood test machines that were already available on the market, and she had to buy up loads of these blood test machines to then put in her lab. And because they were only taking small amounts of blood sometimes, they'd have to water down the blood to make it enough for the sample for the machine. And obviously that then affected the results because you're contaminating it with tap water. So none of these blood tests they were doing were effective. None of them were giving correct results. Some people were giving drastically wrong results. Some people were getting results back from their blood showing them that they had hormone levels that were off, which was indicating that their cancer may have returned. Some people were getting results, again, saying that their hormone levels were off and that they were possibly miscarrying a pregnancy that was actually perfectly viable. And, this wasn't a level of care that these people were expecting from a company that was supposed to be revolutionising the world. So, obviously, a lot of questions started to be asked, and even members were within the quality control teams in the labs that Elizabeth set up. Their quality control testing was all over the place, and it just wasn't working. Nothing was working. So many people kept coming and going. They kept throwing money at these problems. And when it just came down to it, this magic box, much like the box that Victor used to sell, it just didn't work. Now, it all came to a head when I think it was Vanity Fair did an article, and it may have even been... let me just have a quick look. Sorry, I've got a few things open here just to kind of keep me up to date with the story. It may have been the New York Times, one of those, Washington Post possibly, who made an article and just said that this was just all smoke and mirrors, and this lady who was worth $9 billion was essentially just pulling the wool over people's eyes. And this is where it comes down to it then. She was then arrested, her and her partner, who was running the company, he was an investor and then became her partner, essentially just became criminals in this investigation of fraud, a massive fraud against investors. The investors were bringing legal action against them because, Rupert Murdoch invested 150 million on the, assurance that he would be seeing 150 billion back as a return. Now, I always heard a while ago that you can never con an honest man. You can never con someone a man of integrity. So all of these people, again, like I say, she was selling a story and they were willing to buy it. And, a lot of the people who invest in these things, sometimes they're looking to be sold to. So, they all wanted to be part of the unicorn startup, the one that makes them. They all wanted to be ground floor for the new Facebook or the new Google, something like that. And a lot of these people, she didn't go to investment firms and she didn't go to banks for money. She went to specific investors and specific financiers who she was able to use her charms on. And like I say, if she was selling, they were definitely willing to buy. Now the trial's actually happening now. We're recording this at the beginning of December 2021. The trial is on now. In America, they only have a 3-day trial, and there's hundreds of witnesses, so this could be on for another few months to go yet. So we may come back and look at this again. But at the moment, she's just claiming that they made mistakes executing their business plan. Now, that can be true. They're saying that failure doesn't equal fraud. I mean, that is true also. Just because they failed doesn't mean they actively committed fraud. But in a sense, they did, because in all of her videos, in all of the interviews she does, she talks like it works. Now, where she may have got swept up in the hype of Silicon Valley is, her obsession with Steve Jobs and Apple. She used to dress like him. She used to wear like a black turtleneck all the time, and apparently she even made up a voice. So she, she's a cheerleader-looking blonde girl, but she's got this strange deep voice. She kind of talks like this, and it's completely put on. It's completely fabricated. The people who knew her in Stanford, and then who 2 or 3 years later saw her doing TED Talks, know her as not having that voice at all, and that voice being completely fabricated. So that's another odd thing about her, is she's made up her own voice. But again, like I say, her obsession with Apple. I remember watching a documentary about Steve Jobs, and when they first announced the iPhone didn't work. When they're on stage doing that big show where he's walking up and down on the stage and everyone's clapping and cheering, and he's like, iPod, phone, iPhone, iPhone. The iPhone didn't work, and it crashed every time they tried to do something. So, but they weren't far away from having it ready. So what he did is he had on the pedestal on the stage, he had about 5 iPhones there, all ready and waiting. And he'd walk past and he'd grab one and he'd show you the text facility. And just as it sent the text message, he'd turn it around and the phone would crash. And as he walked past the stage again, he'd swap it out for another phone, and then he'd show you the email. And just after he showed you the email, it would crash, and he'd put it back on the pedestal, and he'd get another one, and then he'd show you the phone call and iPod and all that, blah, blah, blah. And after each function, it crashed and burned, basically. So there was an element of theatre about it. So what some people are saying is that Elizabeth Holmes got caught up in the fake it till you make it kind of idea, and that she had this idea that it would be wonderful if you could run hundreds of tests from just a prick of blood in this box that was the size of a small PC, and you didn't have to go anywhere, you didn't have to wait, you didn't have to go to the hospital, you didn't have to have those big needles. So I think she kind of invented something and then wanted to kind of will it into existence. and she basically sold the dream to a bunch of rich older men who then jumped on board with her, and they then set about throwing the hundreds of millions at scientists and brilliant people in the hope that they would then make it work, and Elizabeth Holmes would come out of it looking like the brilliant genius, when in fact obviously it was just hundreds of millions of pounds and hundreds of millions of dollars and some of the best minds in the country, but none of them could make it work, and that was always the problem. And whenever they kept reporting back to her that it didn't work, she'd fire them, and then she'd intimidate them. So was it that she was a con woman, or was it that she just got caught up in the faking it to make it? Now, another aspect of her personality could point towards the fact that she was a bit of a narcissist. She claimed she didn't have a telly and that she just used to work all the time and this and that. But you got to remember, she's a college dropout. She wasn't a brilliant scientist. She did a couple of terms. So she's not by any means, the next Steve Jobs. Possibly she's just trying to be the next Mark Zuckerberg. But again, he was a brilliant coder. So who knows? But yeah, so maybe a narcissist, believe, in that sense. Maybe as the trial goes on, we'll see that, because she used to go on these kind of elite holidays to these kind of resorts that people have never even heard of, because she was up there with the kind of top 10 people in the world who could be the next big deal, So she was on these kind of insane holidays and things, and reaping the benefits of all these world tours and speaking events and having a rock star life, essentially, as a brilliant genius, when none of it was real. So was that her intention, just to kind of have that kind of lifestyle and the praise of being Steve Jobs, but without having obviously the brilliantness to back it up? Or is she just an out and out scam artist? Is she another Bernie Madoff? Was it all just a big scam? Who knows? But like I say, the trial's on now. I've been listening to a podcast called The Dropout. It's brilliant. I listen to it. Pick it up on any podcast platform you can. It's called The Dropout. It picks it up, I think, a few years ago when the kind of story broke, and then it's doing daily updates now of how the trial's going and what's playing out. So yeah, we'll probably come back to this. We'll probably have a look again as it goes on. But yeah, just have a look at some of the pictures and the videos and things about it, because again, it just stinks of being an absolute scam. But as her character, is she just a narcissist, or was she just caught up in the whole ball game of fake it till you make it, and she just couldn't throw enough money at an idea that probably was never going to work in the first place? Now, the whole talk of con men, and like I said, I get bored at work, so I was listening to that podcast about Elizabeth Holmes, and it reminded me of Victor Lustig, especially, because he was selling a box that made money, she was selling a box that did blood tests, and it was essentially the same scam. It just reminded me of one of my friends. When I was in Exeter prison, it was the time I got arrested, and I was gym orderly at Exeter prison, so it was after my time on the resettlement wing. And I spent a number of months down there. I think I was in Exeter for about 9 months, because I was gym orderly, and they kind of put a hold on you for a bit of time because you can do some courses and things. And there are, I think it was 3 gym orderlies at the time in Exeter, and I was one of them, and they kind of mixed the other ones, people would come and go. And one chap, I was a listener with him as well. We did the Samaritans listener program, and we ended up getting on quite well. I think we spent quite some time together. And his name was Nicholas Rowell, and he's a slightly older than me. He's about 50 now. He's 11 years older than me. But we got on really well. He's a nice guy. Now, it's difficult to say this sometimes, because a lot of people think that, because you're in prison, you're all scumbags, and everyone in there is a fucking knobhead. But it's sometimes you can just, being a criminal was my job. Being a con man is his job. I used to beat people up. I used to sell drugs. I used to debt collect. That was my job. Same as any other person. Being a laundry person is my job now. But I don't come home and just start doing laundry at home. I've got a wife. No, I'm joking. Yeah, so, outside of my, being a criminal, I was still a nice guy. I still had interests, still talked football at the pub and things, and outside of being a con man, my mate Nick was a good guy. And he even stopped me from getting my head kicked in one day. He warned me about someone who wanted to fight me, who was going to fight me when we got back to the wing. And, he warned me that was going to happen. And he was the only person who did warn me. So I always, I liked him. And one funny moment that I remember, we were, like I say, we were listeners trained by the Samaritans. And Nick was going to make up a poster to help people who can't read. Nick came up with the idea of making a poster explaining all the services that we can do for them. We can write letters for them. We can help them get in contact with their family, and we can read letters to them. And he got all this information. He designed the poster and everything. And it was only when I mentioned to him as he was handing it over, so Nick, these people who can't read, how are they going to read your poster, mate? And he'd done all that work, and he'd put all that work into designing it, and then he realised that people who can't read aren't going to be reading his poster. But other than that, my mate Nick was a good guy. And I remember I was sat at home one night, and I was watching Crime Watch. It was always interesting to see what other people were doing and what audacious crimes were going on around the country. But I don't know, Crime Watch just ended up being a bit drab. It was always the worst crimes and bloody sex offenders, and it just got a bit. It stopped being. Maybe I just grew up and stopped enjoying watching it. I don't know. But I ended up seeing Nick on there one day because he'd stolen from his employer. He'd basically conned him into getting in a job at some pub or something, and he'd taken a couple of grand from the safe and disappeared. And I just thought that was classic Nick, because Nick was a confidence trickster. That's what Conmen stands for. And he would get IDs, and he would get passports, and he would get police IDs, and he would just be different people in different towns all the time. And he really liked being a police officer because people have a lot of trust in police. What he would do, he had a police ID card, and he would go to car dealerships and rental places and things. And he would go in there in his suit and tie, and he'd tell the guy behind the desk that unfortunately there's been a lot of con men in the area, and we believe that they may have been using your car rental place as part of their scam, using fake card details and things. Now, what I need from you is a copy of all the names and card details of the people who have used your service in the last 3 months, and then we can check that against our database of con men. And these not so smart car rental places would hand over the names, addresses, and card details of all the people that had used the rental in the last few months, and then Nick would have all of those details, which he would then sell on. It's a scumbag crime, I know. I'm not here advocating anything he's done or anything I've done, but these are stories of crime and what my friends used to get up to. All right, so he would then also go to other places, and he would hire out plant machinery, so diggers, tractors, trucks, dumpers, that sort of thing. He would break them down into those container ships, and he'd sell them off to elements of the Russian mafia working in Eastern Europe. He would, what else would he do? When he needed a car sometimes, again, he'd get the police badge out, and he'd go to a car dealership, and he'd say that there's an operation going on up the road, and we need 2 cars just to kind of stake out a house. And the car dealership, thinking he was doing his part, would hand over 2 of their finest, like BMWs or Mercedes and things, so you can go and park up. And he'd just drive off and take them and sell them and chop them up and ship. And obviously the victims of his crimes, he's not a Robin Hood. He's not, there is a victim to everything. So I'm laughing and I'm joking about this because of the audaciousness about it, and because of I'm a fan of people who put themselves out there. I'm not, like I say, I'm not condoning it, but it's I just quickly looked him up, and I don't know if this is the most recent one, but it's one that I saw that made me laugh. This is in Attitude magazine, and I believe it's a magazine for gay men, by the look of it. And here he is, con man jailed after using Grindr to pick up victims. A North Devon man was jailed today after a 2-year spree of conning victims on Grindr. Nicholas Rowell stole thousands of pounds worth of property from Grindr contacts in Plymouth, Fleetwood, Lancashire, Skipton, Yorkshire and Nottingham, each time using the name and passport and identity of the previous victim. Rowell, 50, when was this? This was 2016, so this was 5 years ago actually, so he's 55 now, of no fixed address, was jailed for 5 years and 4 months, so he's out now, for a string of thefts. This included £900 from a pub till in Padstow, £11,000 worth of property from a surf lodge in Croy, £20,000 and a £20,000 Volkswagen Tiguan vehicle, which he was finally caught with after stealing the keys whilst the owners were in church. Nick. Several of Rowell's victims offered him lodging and employment. So this is how good he is. And this is, again, what I was talking about. So Victor Lustig, Elizabeth Holmes, and my friend Nick, all outright, in my eyes, thieves, con men, and things. And people just threw themselves at him because he's a confidence trickster. He wins the confidence and then he takes advantage, like all of these people are doing. So here we go. Several of Rowell's victims offered him lodging and employment, allowing him to drift from job to job under the fake identities and fictitious CVs. The prosecution, Tom Bradnock, said Rowell had sometimes gained the confidence of victims by telling them he had separated from his wife or had money problems because his daughter was sick or his mother had died. Rowell started his crime spree in March 2014, just weeks after being released from a 5-year sentence for a previous conviction. That must have been the one I saw him on Crime Watch for. He targeted members of the gay community in Brighton and Sussex under the online name Slick Nick. Reported in the North Devon Journal, Judge Graham Cottle, he was quite a famous judge around this area, told Rowell in Exeter Crown Court, "This was a spree of dishonesty you carried out on a country-wide basis. You routinely used fake information about yourself and false documents acquired from previous victims. You are clearly a thoroughly glib individual who was able to win the trust of people quite easily and then became your victim. Then they became your victim. One was very vulnerable and were all taken in by your glib personality. You stole from them and then moved on to find your next victim. You have a bad criminal record and you've chosen to live your life by dishonest means." Now that's exactly how he lives his life, and he's out now, so I imagine he is probably bang back at it. Like I say, to me he was a good guy. He was one of the people I would call friends. I knew all about him. I knew he was a con man. He obviously didn't tell me about the victims that were vulnerable. He probably, would con me. If I bumped into him today, he would probably do me over. That's just the kind of guy he is. It's like owning a pet snake and then being shocked when it bites you. That's what snakes do. But when we weren't at work and we were just sitting around having a laugh, he was a good friend of mine. I just wanted to talk today about con men, and it's these people are out there, but they only sell to people who want to be sold to. Just be careful who you're buying from. All right, thank you very much for listening, guys. Like, subscribe, tell everybody about this, and let's continue to grow the podcast. Thank you very much. Cheers. Bye bye.